Good afternoon and welcome to this member exclusive event related to housing and the Housing Toolkit. We've got a couple of great guests. As folks are trickling in, I want to say welcome to each one of you. As a Strong Towns member, you have made this possible because really, truly, if we're not for the contributions of Strong Towns members, it would be extremely difficult to produce resources that are needed in order to be able to bring about the change that we need in our communities, and to do so in an increasing cadence and pace, to be able to deliver the Beyond Blame report related to crashes on our streets and the steps that are necessary to be able to create safer and more productive streets, but also to address the fact that we need to make incremental housing far more commonplace. That is the next level of housing density, next level of housing development just occurring by right, naturally, sort of in response to local needs, rather than seeing the roadblocks and the barriers that we see all around us. And so welcome. As a member of Strong Towns, you have made this possible, but also you are, I believe, poised to benefit from the work that has gone into the Housing Ready Toolkit. If you go over to strongtowns.org/housing ready, you can check out the site that we have set up for this campaign and for the work that we are continuing to do in this space. I want to invite you to drop your comments in the chat and put your questions in the Q&A, or do vice versa. It's up to you. But as you go through this session together with our two guests, as well as Chuck Marohn, one of the things that you'll be able to do is either share resources that you've come across that you think we should be continuing to discuss together, as well as taking some of these ideas and sharing them with others in your community. One of the key things that we want to provide you as you go out from here are things that you can take action on, resources you can share with local leaders, other decision makers, remembering as well that as a Strong Towns member, you are an influencer already, not in the Instagram way, but in the sense that you are someone who, by paying attention to what's taking place in your community, truly does influence then the future direction that is being set. Our core conviction is that these are reasonable requirements that we're asking cities to take, and these are leading edge ideas. They shouldn't be all that surprising, and yet in many places they still are needing to be developed and understood, that these ideas can make our places housing ready. And so I want to introduce our three guests, or our three presenters today. The first presenter that you'll hear from is Eric Kronberg. Eric is, as the internet describes him, a zoning whisperer, known for his ability to break down complex regulations and make things possible, to make things happen. He works at Kronberg Urbanists and Architects in Atlanta, helping developers to navigate the redevelopment maze, or maybe it's even the redevelopment haze that is the commonplace in many of our cities. And he does so by blending urban design, architecture, development, and some version of systems thinking to be able to move things forward in order to create better places. He's co-founded Codes, an incremental code reform company, as well as being a longtime educator with the Incremental Development Alliance and a board member of the Seaside Institute. Then our second presenter, who is going to take everything that Eric has set up and run with it, is Alli Thurmond Quinlan, who is an architect, landscape architect, and small-scale developer, and just all-around creator of beautiful things. She's the acting director of the Incremental Development Alliance, and she helps other small developers build resilient and neighborhood-focused projects. You'll have to ask her about the goats one time, because she has truly refined the art of making development within existing neighborhoods something that is seen to be a true asset to the whole community rather than just to the project proponents. She founded Flintlock Limited and Flintlock Development in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and has lots of experience as a teacher and as an educator and as a lecturer. And so our third presenter is who's going to be presenting our Housing Ready Toolkit and sharing more of the work that we're doing here is Chuck Marohn. He's the founder and president of Strong Towns. He's an engineer, a planner, a longtime voice in the wilderness that has managed through persuasive arguments to be able to reach a much broader audience than ever first imagined. He began to raise questions about the development patterns that we've committed ourselves to, and the fact that these types of patterns of development are actually making our places much more weak and fragile, and that we need to do the opposite in so many ways, create places that are strong. And so one of the key parts of this is around housing. Chuck's book, Escaping the Housing Trap, is familiar to you as members, but for those that are watching this afterwards, go check it out, that he co-authored with Daniel Harrigus as well. Now, Eric, I want to begin with you and have you share a presentation on just how it is that we see the work of building housing ready cities, and what are some of the barriers that need to be overcome? Eric.
Absolutely. Thank you, Norm. And you guys, let me get you guys up there. You can see me, screens ready to go. Good.
Good to go.
Cool. Awesome. All right. I'm going to make sure I get this right. So thank you, everybody. So Alli and I cause a lot of trouble separately and together. We, like Norm said, we are the founders of Kronberg Urbanists and Architects. I've been a faculty member with Incremental Development Alliance, and Alli and I both got so frustrated teaching small developers at IncDev, getting wound up to the right thing to find out it's all illegal, that we founded IncCodes to provide a pathway for smaller scale code reform to let better things happen in great places. And then Alli, with Flintlock does great stuff. So I'll let her talk about herself, but Ink Codes we'll come back to, and Alli will talk more about later. But one of the core things we love with this and we promote is it's educate, pilot, and then policy. And getting those pilot projects out there first really can help normalize and reduce barriers to getting better things to happen, right? And we see Ink Codes as trying to be an easy button to help legalize incrementally develop better places. IncDev, hopefully you all know, Alli will talk more about too. This is us as a firm. We really care about making healthy, flourishing neighborhoods, and we use as many of our skills, tools, tricks as possible to make that happen. We see ourselves, as partners for inclusive places, lasting places, and attainable places. And you really think that our mission is this flourishing neighborhoods concept. They need to include all of these. And we spend a lot of our time on the inclusive component because a lot of folks in the urbanism in particular make really vibrant and lasting places that are really expensive. We're trying to do this in a way that's attainable to everybody. Part of the way we do that is we think about all the different components that go into the functioning of a city. Selfishly, we want as much of the resources to go to the bottom right quadrant to design and less to infrastructure and these other components. So we have to know the costs and opportunities to shift resources around to support the better built environment outcomes. We play in a lot of sandboxes with what we do, so we have a lot of ways to look at problems to help get to a better outcome. And I'm going to shift really quick and do a little bit of setup, like I was saying before Alli goes, to talk a little bit about demographics and the housing mismatch that we see. A lot of this information is coming from AARP, Chris Nelson, but one of the things we like to hit home with folks is that, in 1950, we built less than 300 square feet of house per person. And by 2017, it's over 1,000 square feet per person. Houses are expensive. This is a 3.5 times increase. This is a fundamental math problem in a lot of ways. We're building the wrong stuff. The other thing we like to explain to folks is nationally in 1950, we were almost 4 people per house as a household size. By 2030, we're trending to be around 2 people per household. That means you need twice as many houses to house the same number of people. And since they're now at 3.5 times the size, these are fundamental issues of why housing is expensive. Zoning is the main driver of these outcomes. One of the other things also related to zoning that we really care about is starter homes, as defined by the Census Bureau, of houses less than 1,400 square feet, have trailed to almost nothing. They're almost 40% of all houses built in the 70s, and by 2020, they're less than 10%, around 7 or 8% of all houses provided. And so I'm showing this one for Chuck. Some of you may have seen it before, but we think about the cost of low density and what this means for our places, and how can we incrementally reform the land we have. But a lot of us have seen large lot houses. We understand the strong towns challenges of all the infrastructure, and we often understand, maybe inherently or maybe not, that maybe you've got a family in one of these scarce houses, but oftentimes you have an aging senior that doesn't need all the house but has nowhere else to go, and you end up with a lot of folks that are just priced out or forced out of the neighborhood because there's no resources or availability. And so we look at all these folks, diverse, backgrounds, ages, incomes, goals, and we talk about all the infrastructure stuff, the sidewalks, the curbs, the trees, the utility poles, traffic lights, street lights, water, sewer, storm, paving, all the physical infrastructure. No surprise any strong towns follower. Then we also understand that there's all the services too. And so when you think about all the stuff that these two houses have to pay for, it's really problematic, and it's no wonder cities are stretched to the max. With zoning reform, lot sizes and other kinds of components, you can transform to something more like this, right? So much more tax base for the same amount of infrastructure. And so we like to break this down as, single family homes are part of this, duplexes or 2-packs, attached ADUs, detached ADUs, all these kinds of things through the right kind of policy can promote home ownership, rental opportunities, inclusiveness, attainability, all with the same amount of land, right? And then all those folks that couldn't exist and contribute to the neighborhood and community have a place to call home. But we don't recommend doing this everywhere. We're really specific in where we think things are possible. So we always like to talk about where you should focus your efforts. We've boiled this down for non-urban design geeks to the Sanborn scan. We say to think about your favorite part of town. And we love to point out that it's probably built before October 28th, 1929, which is Black Monday, because before 29, we built our cities car light, without zoning and without subsidy, which meant our places were mobility flexible, use flexible, and cost conscious. Again, strong towns model through and through, sorry. And so they tended to be incrementally built mixed use places. And so when we look at places like Atlanta, like this is our 1929 map, that's our core city. Everything in orange is that same core city from then. This is where Atlanta is today. These are fundamentally different urban fabrics, right? All our walkable places are in the core city. Nothing exists outside of it. This is our 1929 zoning map. Overlaid with all these blue lines are the 1930 trolley streetcar lines. Like Atlanta as a city was an absolute TOD, right? Transit-oriented development. And so whenever we go to another city, we'll grab a Sanborn map and say, hey, for incremental zoning reform, these are the areas that it'll work best. That's not to say that it won't work in other places, but you have the grid, you have the resources for it to sing here. And we have to point out, it's not a shortage of walkable neighborhoods, it's a housing shortage within these places or potential walkable neighbors that we're trying to solve. So briefly, we look at trying to break down through IncDev in our efforts to reduce the brain damage of this incremental infill. And we spend a lot of time talking about understanding the difference between IRC and IBC buildings. IRC costs a lot less to deploy and are a lot simpler to build than commercial structures. At any time you get a couple of units in one, IRC versus IBC, it's a much more cost-effective way to do it. So we spent a lot of time looking at, Sears Roebuck houses. We also love to point out they also did missing middle kits that you could buy from Sears Roebuck too. We were partial to the Atlanta. And so we've developed, I'll go quickly, our own library that we're working with Alli and Union Studios in Providence on our own pre-approved plans programs, where we've got a range of IRC and IBC buildings already designed, ready to go. We've got some great toolkits that explain how to use them, across, the country. And when we talk about how to use them, we are often deploying these in infill situations with nonprofits, land trusts, and other components to get these things to really deploy housing. We're finding that most cities have that 2 to 3 acre block close to downtown that really could be housing focused. So that's the kind of stuff we spend a lot of our thought on. The housing toolkits, that Chuck's going to talk about include a little bit of Finley Street cottages, which I self-developed. And so I wanted to show a few slides of where that is. When you have great accessory dwelling unit policy, you can really start to make some great places. This I went into a long explanation under IncDev does a small bite series. So there's a whole 1 hour presentation on the ins and outs of this project. I'd recommend you track down IncDev and get access to that small bites. And when we talk about this, one of the things we always like to stress is the importance of small lots, small subdivisions. And so we've got on our website a range of cost analyses of what happens when you break things down to give more truly home ownership opportunities right now, which are a lot easier to build and sell. And, these are things we're doing with nonprofits in Atlanta. These 3 houses were 640 square feet apiece. They all sold for $189,000, right? And the builder and the nonprofit accidentally made money on it, and it was workforce housing. And so what we like to talk about with minimum lot sizes and why there's such a challenge, everything on the right is our current zoning. Everything on the left over here is the 1929 minimum lot sizes for 2-family plus ADUs all the way throughout. What I showed you on the page before, Smith Street is a 30 by 30 lot, 900 square feet. That's how you do attainable housing. And so when we talk about how to legalize this stuff and make it happen more, that's what IncCodes is for. And that's why Alli is going to take it away and talk about that. And I'm on time. Bam, check it.
While I pull slides up, Eric and I are in a constant, we're on a lot of Zooms together, and we're in a constant, staying on time. We always both have too many slides, and getting into Zooms on time is a real thing I've been working on in my life. So it's a great introduction from everybody. Thank you guys for being here. I am an architect. I'm a landscape architect. I'm coming to you from Fayetteville, Arkansas. I'm actually in our city hall right now after another meeting. And we come at housing in my office from a lot of different sides. And the thing that I want you to take away from that is how complicated housing is right now, right? That it shouldn't require this many different things kind of in detail to be able to build houses in America, but that's currently where we're at. And we're a really hands-on firm. So I've got a firm of 15 people here in Fayetteville, and we do tactical urbanism installations and we do construction. I serve as a GC sometimes on our own rehab projects. We do development projects. I have been on several city boards, and we do quite a bit of advocacy work as well. And a lot of that, it comes down to the Incremental Development Alliance, which if you are not familiar, IncDev for short is a national nonprofit that trains small developers and the cities that love them. And one of the primary things, I've served as the executive director for about a year. I was on the board before that. And as Eric mentioned, he and I have been long-time faculty. This is our 10th year. We've trained about 8,000 small developers in 32 states and 2 Canadian provinces. And we are really looking forward to kind of our 10th year on the book. One of the things that IncDev talks a lot about is finding your farm, is finding a place that you love, that you are willing to dedicate years of hard work to rebuilding. And I love Fayetteville. Fayetteville is the place that I love, although, it doesn't always 100% love me back. That's the story of being a small developer. But we do a lot of really different kinds of projects here in town, and that has expressed into a lot of really high level understandings of all of the nuances and codes and controls and, complexity of getting houses built here. All of this, though, is really about building strong communities. It's about finding ways to put the kinds of housing that people can afford, that people want, in the locations that they want, near jobs and services that they like, which is the way that we used to build housing. And so some of this, too, that we often find really helpful is to look at who needs housing. What is the kind of housing that we're missing? Because we do, as you saw from Eric, we have this expectation that this is what our average household looks like, but it's not. The vast majority of households are 1 and 2 people households, in many communities. So this is a national stat. We run this stat a lot, and in a lot of communities that are more urban, even, I'm in a 90,000 person college town. Our most common household is 1 person living alone. And, our second most common household is a couple, often with no kids. So, 74% of households are sleeping in 1 bed at night. And they don't have as many cars as you might think that they would. And so all of those stats around, 1 car per bedroom can be really challenging to do. And all of this is really leading into, our housing size is completely mismatched to what we actually need. And we'll see why that is. It's relatively clear. Most of our houses have more than 3 bedrooms. And here is, the secret to why housing is so expensive in America right now. You guys have logged on, member exclusive for Strong Towns. More house is more money. That's really the science behind why the one simple answer of why housing in America is so expensive right now is that our houses are too big, and we need more houses. So they have to be smaller. We need smaller and more houses. Because if we only build more big houses, they're going to be too expensive, they're going to take up too much space, and it's often space that your city does not have. So making housing smaller both helps budgets, it helps our available space problem. It doesn't necessarily on its own make your town stronger. Places can be better when we start to really invest in making our places better with infill, and we can use infrastructure that we already have and infrastructure that we're already paying for. And so good land use policy and infrastructure, it really benefits from all of the things that we're talking about, but let's see what it does for costs for residents too, because this is really the concept that a lot of Eric's work and a lot of my work, you'll notice is we're just taking the same volume of housing you might have built anyway, and we're splitting up those resources into sizes that fit people's needs. So why is that so hard to do? Why is it a thing that has taken us founding more than 1 company to be able to figure out how to do? It seems like it should be a more complicated answer, but it's not. We have this self-imposed legal system, and it requires us to dedicate an unsustainable amount of land and infrastructure and resources to each household, which means we have to build larger houses because we need to make them pencil for developers, which means, we have to be able to get enough money out of the house to justify the land cost and all that infrastructure cost. So that gives us this housing supply supply with a cost and a size that is completely unrelated to actual market demand. And that is single family home zoning. That's it. That's, a lot of this, again, feels like it is really complicated in some ways, but it's also not. And at their heart, single family zoning is an exclusionary land policy that has a very negative and very intentional political past. So both of these books are really required reading for you if you're working in housing or land use policy. They're written as a case law study of zoning and federal housing policies. I cannot understate their importance. And to bring it back to my town, which is the one that we've really done a deep dive on, and it is typical of almost every other town, right? It's just a great example. Before our zoning was passed, our town did this really helpful survey of what kind of housing we had. We had, before our zoning was passed, a surplus of affordable and attainable housing, not quite enough middle-class housing, and we had a luxury housing shortage. I want to note that luxury housing was not illegal to build. It just wasn't very popular to build when other things were legal. So for my town and yours, our housing systems aren't broken. They're working the way they were supposed to work. The Planning Commission made it abundantly clear when they passed the new code what the point of the code was. And I apologize, our city hall is really environmentally friendly, so the light is going to keep going off. The point of the new code for them was to make large lots with nice homes, which again, I want to note, were not illegal. They just weren't very popular. They wanted to discourage affordable housing. This is the entire goal of single family home zoning has been really disastrous for both our city and for our household budgets. And our city growth, when large lot sizes weren't just allowed, but required, had this exponential sprawl pattern that occurred as a direct result of laws that we passed at our city hall over ourselves that we could change tomorrow. I want you to also note, these are small on the slide, but note that population growth as you see this enormous increase in land area, in this enormous increase in infrastructure. We're going from 7,000 people to 17,000 people from the first to the second diagram. You can see when our zoning was passed, then we're only at 36,000 and 73,000. We've had this exponential increase in area without a commensurate increase in population to pay for it. So the real lesson here is the housing system is not broken. It is working exactly the way that it was designed to work, and we're not going to be able to subsidize our way out of that. We have to change the laws. We have to replace the laws that we have imposed on ourselves in our own communities to make housing work. So here are my quick recommendations. This one I always start with because it is the one that we actually need to do, and it always feels really shocking to people. And I really mean it. There's none of this that we can do unless we start to really face and say out loud that we're going to eliminate single family home zoning. And a lot of communities in the United States are doing this. The first community to have passed single family home zoning, because it's this thing, it feels like it was maybe passed down from Moses on a tablet. It's only existed in the last century. Berkeley was the first town to pass one. They also were one of the first towns to repeal their single family home zoning. Minneapolis really famously did this. And if you look at charts of housing costs in each one of these cities that have done this, housing costs are rising less quickly than inflation. And in many places, housing costs are actually reversing and going down. So there is an immediate solution, right, which is available to you at your city hall. And the other thing that I want you to really focus on as we think about eliminating this is, what are we eliminating? What are we eliminating a protection for? Because it's a pattern that's still legal to build, but right now it's the only thing getting built because it's the only thing we allow. And I often find it really helpful, and when you're advocating your own communities for this, I think it's really helpful to show aerial photos and streetscapes of fully compliant single-family home neighborhoods in your town and ask the question, is this the only thing we want to let people build? Is this the only thing that we want to allow? Because this is illegal, this is illegal, this is illegal, and this is also illegal. So when we talk about eliminating single family home districts, all we're talking about is widening the allowances of what we allow people to build. And you don't even have to make a big deal about it. You could just add some additional uses. You could keep the names of those districts the same and add some additional uses to those. You can just change your density charts, right? No density caps. Look, we fixed it. It was just that easy, just a few words in your own city code. And I think it's really helpful also to make your math clear. And this is something that you guys are going to be familiar with from Strong Towns, but we're going to talk about briefly how you can use this data in your own community to make really good advocacy. My town has gone so far into this that we have our own Esri map that we can zoom in and see what all of these things are worth. And so I want to show you guys really briefly. Here's our version of Taco John, right? Here is our totally compliant, totally standard. This is legal It's about $900,000 an acre. It doesn't even, up there in the upper right, doesn't even really show up on the map. This is what we require. Even downtown, in arguably a more valuable location, the pattern of sprawl development is worth about $700,000 an acre, right? That is normal. That is what we're requiring. You can see it there, that little low orange spot right there south of downtown. And it's the same too with, we've got our advanced slide share on here. We may have a little bit of trickiness back and forth. In single family homes are worth a little bit more than commercial zones in terms of what we require in town. But over here on the right, still not really moving the needle at all. Are less expensive single family homes. We have twice as many of them on smaller lots, but they're still worth about the same amount. They're about $1 million an acre. So let's look again. Not even really moving the needle. So let's look at what we could allow people to build, not even require them to build, just let them do it. And a lot of small developers will do this if you let them. So here's some example projects from our own downtown that we kind of as an incremental development cohort in Fayetteville have done. Here's our ugliest building that we've ever done. And I want you to note it is worth $7 million an acre. $7 million an acre for a simple little one-story ugly building without even any windows. This is a restaurant that was empty. The building was empty for 40 years on our main street. This is only a building that was renovated and put back into use because we removed our commercial parking minimums. So sometimes you're going to think it's a parking policy. This is actually an economic development policy. This restaurant is now worth $6 million an acre in property tax and a hell of a lot of money in alcohol markup tax on all the drinks that they sell. Here's my first self-developed project, $8 million an acre. This taxable value had a 2,800% increase after only a few of the houses were built, right? This is just legalizing this is the thing that we're asking you to do in this toolkit. You can see we actually show up as our own little spike. You can see our little curved street there. That little cluster there is my self-developed project here close to downtown. Here's some 1-bedroom, 500 square foot houses that we built on a 50 by 150 lot. So you'll see these again in a second, but these are $5 million an acre. And these sold for $150,000 each, which met federal affordability metrics the year that they were built with no subsidy. And again, this was allowable only because we made it legal. We have a really flexible downtown design code. We've done a lot of these things. Here's our most successful taxable value per acre project I've ever done. It's 8 little townhouses that look like 2 historic homes. It was on an oversized single family home lot that was paying $300 in annual property tax, and it is now worth $13 million an acre. So it shows up as its own little spike next to the park here on our map. And so our next advice is to legalize what you want, to decide as a town what you want. Because most of us think that this is, the part of town that we're going to pay money to go visit in our free time. We're going to go to Disneyland. We're going to walk around. We're going to go to downtown village centers, right, that are walkable, mixed use, lots of amenities. But we've made this illegal in most of our communities. And instead, all of our codes currently require us to build this thing that most of us agree is not a great idea. So one of the places that we can start, one of the places that a lot of successful communities start is ADUs. And we've got a couple of kind of what we list as our poison pills, things that if you put them in your ADU code, you might as well not pass one. And so in 2018, when I was on the Planning Commission, we passed one of the most liberal ADU codes in the country. We legalized 2 ADUs per lot before California did. They got started sooner. We did it faster. We said at the time that if it was too aggressive, we could just come back and amend it to be less aggressive later. And in fact, we have started looking at potential new ADU revisions, but they're to make it more, more aggressive, not less aggressive. We're looking at making 3 ADUs per lot everywhere by right. Allowable parking can be on street. There's no parking required if your ADU is under 800 square feet. You can also now do ADUs on duplexes and in pocket neighborhoods. So this is one of those things that we really want you to think about starting, testing, making it, more as you go. One of the other big ones that we say that I think is really important is just eliminating minimum lot size. There's not some minimum lot size that you can pick that's going to be magic, that's going to let things happen. The lot sizes that Eric showed you, the 30 by 30s, we've done some very small lot sizes too. And I want to introduce you to the concept of a spite house, which is often our example that we use to, let people know that this really is something that can be done in an entertaining way too. A brickmaker built this in an alley next to his house in Alexandria, Virginia in the 1830s to keep loiterers out of the alley next to his house. And while it was built out of spite, 200 years later, it is still providing safe and entertaining housing to residents. And it is the backdrop of many Instagram posts. This is always our example to say, right, this house is on a 500 square foot lot. We do not need to be mandating lot sizes. There is a limit to what people will build. And even if you think that they're pushing it, no one will die. Here's our South Street cottages. These are on 1,800 square foot lots. These would not have been possible with minimum lot sizes. Here are those little 1-bedroom houses. These are 1,400 square foot lots. So lots of examples of how we can do this. But my real takeaways here too are to stop worrying that you're going too far with a lot of these changes, right? We often try to be measured and really practical and really conservative. And I really want to disabuse you of that as the right way to go. I want you to really worry that you're not going far enough. The problem in housing is so severe. The housing crisis is so severe. We are working in places where there are professionals that are dual income living in cars. And it is so significant in a way that many people don't realize because they have houses that I really can't understate how important it is for us to begin to really let people build housing that works for them in ways that we have done historically. Because as a design professional, we're always going to talk to you about buildings and streets and density and all the math and numbers. But the thing about the built environment is that it's not actually about buildings. What we're building is the backdrop of people's lives. We're building the street that you're going to learn to ride a bike on. We're building the cafe you're going to build friendships in. We're building the street that you're going to drive down on the way to the birth of your first child. So it's not just about buildings. This is about building a place for people to live. And so time is of the essence to get this stuff running. We will miss entire childhoods if this takes 20 years to get right. So what we always end on from an IncDev standpoint is this idea that each one of us really has, with the best of intentions, is not able to solve this alone. We've got to work together to make major changes across the board to housing policies, workforce development, and approaches to parking to make this a place that people can continue to live good lives. So we're excited to hear more from Chuck about the launch of the toolkit.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alli. Thanks, Eric. This is what it is like to work with real professionals. You guys are awesome and clearly do a lot of this presenting, so I appreciate it. I've seen a lot of people in the comments ask, is this stuff going to be available? I want something that I can give to my city council members. I want something I can give to my city staff, my mayor. I'm here to tell you, this is what we put together for you. The whole idea of this toolkit is something that you can take and give to people to move action forward. Last April, Escaping the Housing Trap was published, and I've been on the road pretty much steady since then, talking about housing. And in every community that I go to, there is a certain level of hopelessness or lack of hope when you walk in the door, because this problem seems so huge, it seems so insurmountable, it seems like something that we can't as individuals make any impact on. When I go through the presentation, I lay out 3 areas that we need to make advances in, 3 areas that we can, as local officials, as local advocates, as local city staff, make huge amounts of progress in. We can change our regulatory environment to allow more units to be built. We can foster a community of local incremental developers to go out and do this work. And we can help finance that revolution so that our local markets are responsive locally and not tied up with some national financial institutions. These 3 things, to me, like we simplify it down, I still get to the end of the talk and people say, okay, how do we get started? What's the first step? What we're going to share with you over the course of this year are 3 separate toolkits to take those first steps in each of those 3 areas. And today we're starting with the first one, the code reform part. We've called this the Housing Ready City Toolkit. The idea is not to tackle every problem that every developer is going to run into. There's so many things that we can do. We simplified it down to the top 6 things that every city has within their power to go out and do today, to take the steps today that will make a huge, inordinate difference in getting housing built. So you can go right now, strongtowns.org/housing ready. You can send that to your mayor. You can send that to your city council member. You can send that to whoever in your community is going to make a difference on this. We have formatted it for them to be able to access and read and utilize and make progress on. Go to the website. On that site, you're going to find a quiz. You're going to find a map of cities that are housing ready. And I want you to know that part of our initiative here is to fill up that map. We want to create the FOMO in every city hall. Like, hey, we want to be part of this. Our rhetoric here is about wanting to be pro-housing, pro-neighborhood. We want to get housing built. Well, okay, if you want to get housing built, let's be serious now. Here's kind of like the base things. If you can't do these 6 things, you're really not serious about housing policy. And so let's go. Let's get you on this map. And when we get you on the map, we're going to celebrate you. We're going to let people know that you are a housing ready community. We're going to send developers like Eric and Alli to your place with capital and wanting to go build great things, because this is a place where I can make a lot of progress. We're going to send young people who want to get into housing. We're going to send middle-aged and elderly people who want to get into housing. We're going to send them all to your place to be part of your awesome community, because you are one of the ones that have stepped forth and said, we're ready to do this. We're ready to be housing ready. On that webpage, you're going to see the checklist. Again, our team here, this is what we do. We're communicators. We made this printable. We've made it shareable. The idea is we want you to be able to take it, hand it to that city council member, hand it to that planning commission member, hand it to that city staff member and say, hey, this is what we want. These are the policies we want. None of this is hard. Go out and do it, right? So what are these 6 policies? These are things that Alli's touched on. These are things that Eric's touched on. What we've done is we've taken them. Again, I'm not pretending this is a comprehensive list of things we need to do. These are the easy things, the big impact, low lift kind of things. So allow single family home conversions by right in all your districts. Alli called this single family home zoning. Regardless of how you frame it, the idea is that we should be able to take any lot, any house, any place in your city and make it a duplex or a triplex as easily as we can make it into a single family home. The second one, let's permit backyard cottages everywhere. There's really no reason why we can't take our excess yard space and convert that into housing. We see this being done all over the country. It works really well every place that it's tried. Again, this is the low-hanging fruit of getting lots of units built really quick. Allow this stuff by right. Let people do it very quickly, very easily. Legalize starter homes in all residential zones. It's astounding to me how many cities have a minimum house size requirement actually in their code. Alli showed you some great places that wouldn't meet a lot of those codes. Eric is out building these things all the time. They both pointed out that if we want more affordable units, a big function of that is going to be making them smaller. Alli, you didn't see me, but I did the head exploding gesture when you showed that, kind of mockingly, because of course, if you can shrink the size of the house, you can actually build it cheaper. And when you go the other way, when you require massive, large homes, they're not going to be affordable. They're going to be really expensive. Legalize smaller house sizes in all your residential zones. Eliminate that minimum lot size requirement. Alli talked about this, brought this up. As a former, I'm going to say zoner or person who worked in a zoning office or consulted with a lot of zoning offices, I know this freaks city staff people out because they feel like that minimum lot size is like their way of controlling things. There are so many better ways to control the style of development that you're getting. Minimum lot size is this blunt tool that really restricts all the innovative, all the great stuff that you want to see happening, including the Spite House. I never heard that story. That's pretty awesome. Repeal parking mandates. And, I will just say, it's a little bit like the Van Halen red pill thing. Van Halen had the, red pill, red M&Ms. They would put this little stipulation in their contract saying, if you, we want a jar of M&Ms in our ready room, in our green room, but we want all the red ones removed. And everyone's like, oh, Van Halen's a bunch of divas. But the reality is they had this really technical contract. And they said, we know that you read the contract if you actually come in and have that done. And so it's kind of like a spot check. For me, a spot check on a community, whether they're serious or not, is I just open up their zoning ordinance. And if they've got parking mandates, I'm like, this place is not serious. If I got to go through 20 pages of tables that are worthless and not really based on any sound science, but are just copied from some other municipality, I know that this city is not serious about housing. Repeal those parking mandates. It's like the 101 is like the first step to getting it done. And then people like Eric and Alli, when they're coming to your community and they're doing the red M&M test and they open up your zoning code, is going to say, okay, this place is actually like thoughtful and has taken some basic steps. And then number 6, streamline the approval process. I can't emphasize this enough. In the early days of Strong Towns, it shocked me when I would go around the country and find places where it would take 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months to get a basic permit approved. I'm walking into City Hall. I've got a completed application. I've got all the things I need for you to review. Our standard, and the standard we're putting forth for a housing-ready city, is that if someone walks in with a completed application on Monday, they need to be getting a permit on Tuesday to build. And if that seems impossible, what that is it's a challenge for us to figure out our internal process so that we can make that happen. Because that's the way we get housing built. That's the way we lower the kind of waiting period, the holding period, the uncertainty period for developers, and really then broaden the market out for who can actually deliver this housing to us. These are simple steps we can take. I'm not going to pretend that they are comprehensive, that they will deal with every problem that every developer is going to come up with. But this is like the base thing to get started. And when people ask me, what should we do? Do these 6 things. There's a lot more to do, but do these 6 things first. Get them done. We'll put you on the map. We'll make you a housing ready city. We will celebrate you. All the FOMO like will be gone. Like you will be the place. And we'll make a big deal out of it. And then you're going to get to work building houses. We've got another toolkit coming later this year on incremental developers that are going to build on this one. Let's get this one out. Let's get the momentum around it. Let's get people building stuff. This is really, really exciting work. Thanks, Alli. Thanks, Eric. And
Thank you, Chuck. We
Yeah.
are ready for a few rounds of questions, and I want to focus first on some of the more technical questions, and then we're going to take up Jonathan's question on how do we popularize this, because that is something that we as Strong Towns members really face all the time. How do we create a compelling case for this? Even for you, Eric and Alli, is if you saw Jonathan's question asking like, hey, do you just go and talk about this more, or is there sort of a particular path? But the first technical question, I think related to the Housing Ready Toolkit and the presentations from each of the 3 of you, is what to do about restrictive covenants and some of the deed restrictions or HOA requirements. And is there a path forward for that? Or is that one of those intractable things that we should first be doing all of the other things that we need to get to before we begin to take that on? Maybe Alli, you're nodding vigorously, so go ahead.
One of the ways that at IncCodes we've talked about approaching that, Eric and I, is that part of the idea is there's so much low-hanging fruit that you should go after first. You can pass all of this citywide, and you don't. So the answer of how you handle that, and some towns have done this, is you have one lawsuit where you sue an HOA and have them uphold their covenants in court, and mostly they won't. But I wouldn't start there, and I have not started there, and sort of taking the opposite approach of passing this citywide and then putting it everywhere that it works that doesn't have an HOA. Is a really great approach. Letting the HOAs and the covenants stand for now is a really helpful approach. Part of the reason that that's really useful is the IncCodes approach is to have an exclusion zone, in which people can sign up that they don't want this to happen in their neighborhood, but it requires a 75% of contiguous neighbors to sign up to maintain their own zoning. I also argue that that should come with a higher tax rate, because you're arguing that you want to get to live in it. You want laws to be passed that mean that your place is not solvent and other neighborhoods have to subsidize you by having enough housing. So I think that's a thing that should be available at a cost for neighborhoods that really feel that way. One of the things that really a lot of this is coming down to also is most people are not trying to go after existing single family home neighborhoods. One of the biggest concerns about this in most places is that the vast majority of new housing is provided as greenfield subdivision developments, which means it's not even as much about existing homes that are being built. It's mostly, our mayor actually just stuck her head in briefly. It's mostly about new neighborhoods that are being built under this pattern. Like we have to stop making more of this problem before we even start to look at addressing the problem that was already founded.
Could I add, I do feel like there's a lot of things, building code stuff, deed restriction stuff, that are state level policies that are downstream of what we're talking about here today. I do want to say though, part of this is about shifting the culture. And so if you download the toolkit and you get into it, what you will see is that with each of these reforms, we have included a case study that we're all members here. Everybody here is friendly. I'm going to give you a little bit of strategy under the hood here. The idea is to make these as relatable and as human and as non-exceptional as possible. What we want, and I'm going to use air quotes here, normal people. We want everyday, regular Americans living in a home to see themselves in this change. There's a lot of people out there who are house rich and cash poor. The roof needs to be fixed. The HVAC unit needs to be updated. There's a lot of people who are backyard rich and cash poor. Same thing. They've got all this financial stress, but they've got a large backyard. These are opportunities for people who have equity and asset to turn some of that into cash flow that can actually make their lives better. And so the examples that we used are designed to talk to people who would never generally have a NIMBY type reaction, like we don't want this in my neighborhood, and put it in terms that would benefit them. And I do think that that is an important advancement here to getting beyond the restrictive covenants and all that, because those are private civil litigated type things. And if nobody's going to take up that fight, it's not going to matter. Those things will just go away the same way race-based covenants and other things, have in a sense, are still on the books in some places, but no one is ever going to enforce them because no one's going to bring a lawsuit in that sense.
So one thing to add on to that, Norm, just as an example, if you really want to like turn the knife to grandparents or new younger parents, you can brag about how you have an in-law or a parent living in an ADU and you haven't paid for babysitters for 5 years.
Yeah.
The grandparent cashed out and now to see the grandkids after school every day. You really want to make people jealous. Like that's what we did. It's so awesome.
When I'm at Eric's house, there is 100% of the time cookies made by his mom, who lives in a house that he built for her, on the counter because she's 5 doors down, because she's in a small house that's only legal because the house could be built on a really small lot and the house could be built really small. All of this stuff is contributing positively to people's lifestyles. And I also, when I say I'm not like here defending covenants, I'm just saying if you get into NIMBY neighborhoods and if you get into covenant neighborhoods, you will not believe the hornet's nest that you have unleashed. And so as a person who 2 weeks ago was at a city council meeting that I had to be escorted to my car based on NIMBYs yelling at us and being really mad, that's not an unserious thing. So we're not saying you shouldn't eventually get there. I'm not saying that's not important. I'm just saying you don't have to start there. There's so much more low-hanging fruit for you to go after, and there's so much good work that you can do before you, unless you're just a masochist and you're like dying to go after this, in which case you actually only have to win one lawsuit against one neighborhood, and none of the other HOAs will even try to enforce their covenants because you don't have to win them all. You just have to win one. But I really don't recommend starting there. I recommend starting with the cookies from grandma on the kitchen counter and getting the housing built in the neighborhoods that you can build it.
Yeah, we are not advocating for go find the biggest bully and punch him in the nose and then wonder why things got heated. And I think there can be this real desire to just go fix the biggest problem rather than saying, like, how do we create many of the conditions that we need? Eric, maybe you can weigh in on the question that a lot of people have whenever new short-term or ADUs or backyard cottages are proposed, that they're just going to become short-term rentals, and that in context where, you have too many of those, or there's a perception that they have so significantly affected the rental market, that the better approach is to restrict all development rather than allowing these types of things to pop up. Can you respond to that in maybe in a couple minutes, and then we'll take up the last question together?
Yeah. So, we talk about short-term rentals or STRs a fair amount. I'm a big fan of allowing short-term rentals for owner occupancy. Like you could live in the house, you could short-term the back, like you have basically on-site property management with that kind of situation. But we also see is that a lot of people that do short-term rental, they'll do it for 1 to 3 years, and then it often reverts back to long-term, right? That's a very typical situation. In the neighborhood I self-developed, I've built in a lot of short-term rental guest suites in a lot of the houses, and several of those suites have actually shifted to mid-term rental. Nurse housing, 30 to 90 day leases, and some long-term in there. So the flexibility is important, but it's also a small community and everything's owner occupied in those with the suites. So if there's a problem, you know where the owner is right away, right? They're not in another state. So I usually do not like owner occupancy at all for ADUs other than short-term rental, right? That is the thing. That's a code enforcement thing for the city, but that's kind of the balancing act. If you're in a New Orleans or a very popular place to visit, that's a really powerful tool to make it more affordable for the homeowner to live there, right? That's a really powerful rent producing tool. Not as good as long term, but you realize, man, it's a lot of work to change the sheets like every couple days and fill up the soap and all that stuff. And like, you'd probably take $1,000 less a month just to have a long-term tenant in there and call it a day. We see that happen a lot.
I think it's important to note too that communities can really turn short-term rentals into an asset when they are licensed. And so our community has a licensing process that if you own one short-term rental and you're a resident of the city, you have a different kind of license than if you own more than one, right? If it's a business, if you own a bunch of them or you're out of state, that's a different thing than you have a backyard cottage and you rent it out. And so we have two tiers of short-term rentals, which really helps. And they will sometimes get denied. You know, it's a discretionary permit that can be given. And so if we did a project that had a pretty, big rezoning to let it be workforce housing, then a couple of owners asked to take the whole house and make it a short-term rental. We showed up at that hearing and said, don't give them a permit. We asked for this to make it workforce housing. This is why the permitting process exists. So it can be a real asset to a community too. Eric and I are wrapping up a pre-approved regional housing program in Barnstable County this week. So it's all of Cape Cod, all 15 communities in Cape Cod. And one of the things that they have done, 96% of housing in Cape Cod is on septic systems. And so they've got huge nitrogen water quality issues. And retrofitting communities for sewer is massively expensive. So they have turned their seasonal short-term rental desirable economy into a huge pro to address that specific challenge. There's an add-on tax to short-term rentals that funds sewer infrastructure specifically. And so it also can be something, if you're thinking about it as it's a business, it can and should be licensed and legalized. You can make sure that the housing is safe. You also can turn it into something that is positive economically for your community if you really license that, kind of business aspect of it.
100%. Let's take up this question a minute to each of you on for Alli and for Eric, and then we'll throw it over to Chuck to conclude that you've been through this material before. Jonathan asks, in that context, how do you sort of use your energy to either convince opponents or expand the breadth of support? And how do we work to get to, I like that phrase, energize the sympathetic?
So I'll go first and Alli can go next. And so what we do at our firm from the design side is we put together a whole program. We often partner with nonprofits because they feel less evil, and we help them take a site. We help them take our pre-approved plans. We design a project for them. We basically almost have project in a box for them. We can move really quickly with that. But because they're a nonprofit, typically doing workforce housing, it's a really useful pilot to show how to build a beautiful place, right? We help the jurisdiction get a good zoning district that they can keep using, but we want to lead by example and pilot first. So that's how we change hearts and minds, because zoning is fuzzy and scary to humans. Cute houses, cute cottages, those are understood. And usually people want more cottages and more cookies from grandma, right? Like those are the areas that we want to lean into.
I get pretty nerdy about it actually. And I think the thing that I really always want to encourage people is it's pretty easy to volunteer to be the person in your town that shows up to all the meetings. Getting on board, showing up, being really active costs nothing except your time. And so it's really accessible. Your local government, especially if you're in a community under 1 million people, is so much more accessible than you think it is. And showing up to meetings and talking and being involved and volunteering is the thing that will make an impact. And it's the thing that you could do tomorrow. Just learning about how your city government works and what are the politics at play and what are the biggest challenges your town is facing. Being really, really active in local government is something that can be incredibly impactful. And so I often, really encourage people to think about the fact that they can make public comment on almost any issue that comes up. And you can often do slides on public comment. And so we have, really bounced around the idea of having sort of a pre-prepared set of 3-minute slides with notes for people to be able to give as public comment, for their communities, as they talk about budget issues, as they talk about rezoning issues. Show up and be a supporter on the phone or in person for housing projects that are happening. Writing in support really doesn't make much of an impact in most communities. Showing up to the meetings is the thing that's really impactful. And so if I was going to tell people to do one thing to get people energized, it's show up, make the most of your 3 minutes, be really prepared, and talk positively about the kind of place you want to build in a human scaled way. Use human examples of your neighbors to make this, not about is the zoning code chart right, but to make this about like, can I find a place to live that I can afford, that my kids are having a good childhood?
That's awesome, Alli. I hope your mayor was listening in through the door, because that is fantastic. To conclude, and I'll throw it over to Chuck in a moment, but thank you all for attending. And Chuck, can you share just what now? What are the things that we are able to help people take action with, and what are the things that we're looking for?
Yeah, I think that everybody listening today and everybody watching this today is going to be impressed with Alli and Eric, and rightly so. They're very, very impressive. I'm going to say something, and I think the two of these people will agree with me. In the world of incremental developers, they're extraordinary people, but they're not extraordinary compared to other incremental developers. There's a lot of people who are really dynamic, like these two, who are out doing this kind of work or trying to do this kind of work really in every city. And what I find, when we can unleash that group of people, they will do beautiful things. And I'll say this, Alli, Eric, you can nod along if you want. I watch big developers come to a city, and obviously they've got a bottom line, and they're working on a bottom line, and that is what drives them. When I watch incremental developers work, they have a bottom line too, but their bottom line is different. And in their ledger is this line that I would just call love, like passion. And it's kind of ridiculous sometimes, because I watch them do things that don't make economic sense because they have so much love and passion. I watch big developers walk away from projects that, like, this project went upside down and I'm just done. I'm walking away, and you're going to have 20 years to fix this site, city. Done. I watch these incremental developers work with a lot of love and passion. And so I think if your narrative in your city is developers bad, you're meeting the wrong people. You're meeting the wrong people, because these people are astounding. So here's what we're putting this on for our members. Your members are really like the vanguard of this whole movement, right? We've created this toolkit, this web page, the quiz, the downloadables, all that, for you to be able to get out and share with people. And so everyone who's asking, like, how do I get a hold of this? How do I communicate this? This is what we put together. All our social media feeds, all of our content streams are running now housing content that is incredibly shareable. So if you are on Facebook, if you are on Instagram, if you are on Twitter, wherever you're at, if you follow Strong Towns, you are going to get the kind of bite-sized stuff that is like the introduction to get people deeper into this conversation. Please go to those places, share that stuff. We're going to be running some of this on podcasts, and I know we're going to call through the questions, and if there's ones that we haven't answered, we're going to do a follow-up podcast on that. So you can follow the Strong Towns podcast stream. This video is going to be available on our Strong Towns Library YouTube channel, and you'll get an email after this letting you know about that. A couple other things that are going on. We've been running this Strong Towns Accelerator series all year. We did Strong Towns first book. We are halfway done, or 2/3 of the way done, with Confessions of a Recovering Engineer. The accelerator session for the housing trap is going to start here in about 6 weeks or 8 weeks. If you want to get involved in that, strongtowns.org/accelerator. Again, this is a course designed for people who are ready to accelerate change in their place. We're going to go through the book. We're going to walk you through how to get housing work started in your place. The class sizes are really small and intimate, so we have a lot of discussion, but go and do that. And then I just want to let you know, we this year have committed to doing a live stream like this every month. We have a lot of stuff that we are producing coming out, and we want to make sure that you're getting it and that it's in front of you and that you're getting a chance to hear from the great people that we get to interact with all the time. Next month, you're going to hear from my good friend, Joe Minicozy. He has some financial analysis work that is going to blow your mind. I have been in a room 3 different times when he's presented this to people, and each time they have walked away stunned. And so please, you're going to be getting emails and communication about signing up for that. It is on March 20th at, it says 2 p.m. on my list. I'm assuming that's Central Time Zone because Strong Downs runs on Central Time Zone, but I don't know. Look for your email and you will get that note. You don't want to miss this stuff with Joe because it again is going to blow you away. Norm, thanks so much, my Canadian friend, for helping lead this session. And are you going to sign off or you want me to sign off?
Why don't you sign off? I think certainly a round of applause for Eric and Alli are in order as well. Great job to the both of you. But take it away, Chuck. Finish it off.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here and keep doing what you can to build a strong town. Take care. We'll see you next month, if not sooner.